Ok, afsakið, ágætu gestir og stíg. Ég vona allir skilji útlensku, þó að Dr. Short og Dr. Crawford skilji vel íslensku, þá held ég að ég bara nenni ekki að tala. Þannig að við tölum mikið á útlensku og ef það eru eitthvað spurningar á íslensku þá get ég bara þýtt þar yfir. Þannig að við byrjum á útlensku. Dear guest, welcome. This panel discussion is held in conjunction with the upcoming Fire Festival at Eiríksstöðum, 5th to 7th July. I hope you all make it there. Please put your phone on silent unless there's an urgent phone call coming or you want us to hear when you snap a picture. Let's just share them with us. There are no set rules to Viking research in general, as there are no set rules to this panel discussion here. It's really informal. I hope you show your daring drengskapur and ask us questions. It can be guided to an individual or the panel as a whole, and if any of the panel participants have something to add to the answer, just go ahead. I will introduce the players in íslensku. Because I didn't translate it. We have Ármann Guðmundsson, fornleifafræðingur og sérfræðingur þjóðminja hjá Þjóðminjasafninu. Já, má klappa, það má klappa. Dr. Ármann Jakobsson, prófessor í íslensku bókmenntum fyrri alda hjá Háskóla Íslands. Dr. Jackson Crawford, sérfræðingur í fornnorrænu tungumáli og goðsögnum. Fylgist með hann á YouTube, kaupið bækurnar hans. Dr. Guðrún Dröfn Whitehead, prófessor í safnafræði hjá Háskóla Íslands og höfundabókarinnar The Performance of Viking Identity in Museums, aftur kaupið bókurnar. Dr. Terry Gonell, prófessor emeritus í þjóðfræði hjá Háskóla Íslands og vel ber að merkja aðra höldurárum. Ég fór í lokahófið hans og ég veit ekki hvað ég á að segja mér og það bara ofstórt. Þannig að endilega klappið fyrir honum. Hilmar Hilmarsson, allsherjargoði Ásatrúarfélagsins. Dr. William Short og Reynir Óskarsson, sem ég, frá Hörstvík, höfundabókarinnar Men of Terror og rannsóknarmenn í tilraunakenndri fornleifafræði í tengslum við bardagaaðferðir víkinga. Þannig að ég að vona að einhver sýni hetjudáðina og kasti fram fyrstu spurningunni sem að fær þá líklega mjög fjölþætt svar við. Einhver hetja? Engin, komið hérna alveg tóm. Shall I ask the first question if nobody dares?
Yes, please.
Okay. This will be a strange one and I'll throw it at you, Dr. Crawford Jackson. So, we're all in the medium in one way or another of our research of this really interesting topic. And you seem to have broken the mold how to get this information in the sea of bad information to those who are seeking information. What is the secret?
Well, this is a good test of the microphones. Does that work?
Yes.
All right. I don't think that there is a secret. I think that, you know, if you watch someone just pitching dimes against the side of a building, you think, what is this guy doing? He's wasting his time. But then if you see him do that for 9 years and just keep doing it, you think, this guy's onto something. I think that may be the position that I'm in as far as making YouTube videos about Norse myth and language and things like that. I've just been doing it for a long time. I don't know that it's necessarily that I've done it successfully so much as compulsively. But I think that anyone who wants to take on a public education endeavor like that does need a little bit of that compulsiveness. I think that you do have to keep doing it because, of course, the first efforts that you put out aren't going to be seen by anyone. You have to produce a steady stream of content for a long time before anyone sees anything. And I think that just that persistence is exactly, perhaps if there is a secret, the secret.
Any other secrets from the other panelists?
I think that cultural institutions like museums hold immense power here to give the public information. And the way they do it is really important because you can't fully remove the stereotype and the truth because it's somewhere in between. So you need to take all these ideas that people have, put it in the center, and then expand on it in some way, rather than completely remove it. I think that's the power of places like museums. We go there to be informed and learn more.
I would maybe like to add here is that it's really important, not to be afraid to do mistakes.
Yeah.
And admit when you're maybe a little bit wrong and be open to different kind of opinions. I think that's at least how I see really vital. And part of this was a public outreach.
I would add to that, I'd say it's more than just important, it's essential to have that open mind and say, okay, this is my best estimate of how things are now with the information we have, but be very willing to say, okay, this information that I used to base this conclusion I now know is wrong. Let's continue the research and try to come up with a better idea, a better hypothesis that fits the evidence we've got. So we're constantly improving our hypothesis, constantly changing. We're not afraid to say, nope, that was wrong. Now we've got to continue our research.
Yeah, we have to put a label on it. We call it, pressure tank theory.
Yeah.
So we put so much pressure in the theory until it bursts. And our story is just a trail and trail and trail of burst gas tanks. It didn't make it.
And that's of course one of the strengths of experimental archaeology, is that test this kind of thing, and something that you cannot fully understand unless you try to experiment with.
I think the proof is always in the pudding.
Yes.
And also when you make mistakes, and I have made some glorious mistakes myself, there have always been some really nice side results. In fact, Odin's raven magic was my biggest mistake in trying to date an Icelandic poem, and I was way off, but the music that came out of it was brilliant. So I think my experience in free jazz has helped me quite a lot, and is essential to my success, wherever it may be. Thank you.
I think in general, one of the key things, can you hear what I'm saying? Several things come out of this. Going from what Jackson was saying in this show, it's really important to realize and to try and teaching in university, for example, it's not about building walls, it's about opening doors. And it's a matter of reaching out and connecting. And in terms of things like experimental archaeology and things of this kind, we know exactly how much people have learned from, for example, building houses, making ships, foods, performance, whatever else. These are things that almost like everything that we come up with in terms of Old Norse religion or Old Norse literature. Everything is about making suppositions. We don't know very many things for fact. In terms of the Icelandic sagas, these are sagas that have been written about 1300, about things that happened 400 years before, based on an oral tradition that's been changing a great deal over time. And for example, the way that they look at ships in 1300 is nothing like the way a ship would have been in 900. You understand what I mean there? The only way to try and deal with this is to do experiments and step back and try and work out how things might have been. And that means not just the experts sitting here in our sort of ivory towers and whatever else, but reaching out to other people who are interested, who are ready to do experiments and things of this kind, and then to raise new possibilities, new suppositions. So it's a matter of working together, which is really what the university teaching, like teaching anywhere, is about working together, dismantling walls, and trying out ideas. As I say, certainly in terms of ships, we have the only way to work out the rigging on a ship is to take a look at the Gotland stones and try and guess how that might have worked. Nobody knows otherwise. In terms of houses, roofs, as archaeologists know pretty well, nobody knows much about exactly how they let the smoke out on a house. And certainly in Norway, they were doing various, people I was working with, they were doing various experiments. And if you have a hole in the middle of a roof and you have Norwegian rain, the fire is put out in a flash. So you have to have a hole somewhere else on the other side and try out things and see what goes. So experiments, connections, working together really, really matter. And part of what Jackson's doing certainly is reaching out to people in a more informal fashion. So to get rid of our sort of academic gowns and to come out and have coffee with people and have a drink with them and chat and try things out.
That's one of the strengths, I think, of the Viking image. It's a very powerful image. It's an immediate connection. And you can connect it to all these really important, really interesting debates, which are relevant today. I mean, when I was doing research for this book, it was in 2009, it was my first one, and people kept talking about the financial crisis, because the bankers were the Vikings, you see. So you can make all these contemporary issues relevant to history in these meaningful ways, by collaborating and trying out new things in new ways. And that's one of the interesting things, I think. That's how you can teach it to different people and make this history relevant. Yeah.
I wonder, Jackson has spoken about films for cinemas and television about Viking and Viking age. I wonder, as you say, are people only interested in fighting, killing, and so on? The general public who might be interested in this medieval stories. What about the wisdom of Odin, Havamak? Do that come into these? I haven't seen those videos or films you're making in America. I haven't seen it. Is there something? I think the wisdom of Odin has an errand today. So, okay. Are people interested, for example, in the United States, are people interested in the wisdom of Odin?
We have two here from America, so maybe you can answer that?
Well, people certainly are, but I think that you're also looking at different layers of interest. You know, there's a fairly superficial layer of interest that just says Viking's cool. And then there's, I think, maybe a secondary layer of interest where someone is starting to become a little bit of what I'll call a near outsider. Someone who hasn't started to get especially interested in Norse culture, but has read a little bit here and there and might have become aware of a word like alcohol. And then I think you have a core group of interested people who really want to learn everything that they can about a particular culture, in this case, Old Norse, Old Icelandic. And for someone like that, alcohol may be richly interesting and something that they absolutely want to see more about. Now, there's different layers within that too. For anyone that a text becomes a special guide for, they may or may not actually read it objectively. I mean, I know plenty of people who quote the Bible almost incessantly without actually having ever read it. And I've noticed the same thing started to happen with Havamal. There are fake Havamal quotes that float around the internet, occasionally attributed to me, or attributed to my translation, which is aggravating. I mean, it takes, there are stoplights in Reykjavik that are long enough that you could read how them out. But absolutely, people are interested in it, and I think a lot of people seek some kind of practical or spiritual wisdom in older texts, and Havamal is an obvious candidate from this culture.
So I'd like to answer a little bit. I think you started your question with what I would generally call Hollywood films, video presentations, television presentations, whatever they might be. And I think of Hollywood as being entertainment rather than education. So we always say that history is not entertainment and entertainment is not history. Now, a Hollywood film isn't going to stop and explain some detail that you need to know about the history. It's going to be entertaining. So the violence, the combat, this conflict, that is what these Hollywood presentations are going to focus on. So whether to say the audience is interested or not interested is probably less important than what the producers think the audience is going to be interested in. And what the producers think the audience is going to be interested in is this conflict and violence. So are they going to accurately present that combat, that aspect of the Viking Age society? And I think the answer is no, because that's not the entertaining part. The entertaining part is seeing people whack each other with swords. So I think not.
One more thing. We're just really lucky that some filmmakers talk to people like Terry and get some really good information from them. Yeah. So I hope they just communicate more with them.
The unlucky ones talk to me.
I think that also one of the interesting things is that people see these films and then they go to museums to understand if it's truthful, right? So they see these films and think, wow, does this really happen like that? And they go to museums to see it. And those places use medieval sources to lend color to the archaeology. A lot of these places have Havamal and poems and stories to make it more colorful in an authentic way. So they will be familiarized with it once they go into these places. The marketing people I have spoken to in these Viking museums call it a gateway. Talk about it as a gateway to deeper learning. That you go in because you think violence is cool when it's a Viking, and then you go into the museum and you think, wow, they were so much more than that. That's one of the things that you can bring. It's just what is each sort of medium trying to do, what is their purpose? And the purpose of the film is to make it interesting and to be entertaining. And the museum has, or educational institutions or whatever it is, they have a different aim. That's where you can learn more.
But then it can get quite strange sort of is that we often get that question here. Where is all the swords, basically? Okay, please show me, all of the thousands of swords that you have. 26 or something, yeah. and only 5 or something are on display.
Yeah, and then back.
Yeah. So something is really, there's something strange going on with this image.
Yeah. But the Rannsóknir is an interesting place because you can read that story into that exhibition if you seek to do so. But it is the only museum I have visited where they explicitly say Icelandic people were not Vikings. So we in Iceland have a different, perhaps, history with that image, which is only changed really in 2008 and 2009.
Yeah. Well, I've been reading the sagas all my life and studying them since I came to university, and I'm not interested in battles and violence at all. So there's other things to see in these, and I think almost the only interesting book I read about battles is their book. It manages to make it interesting even to me. But I tried my hand at a podcast recently, and it's quite successful. It's in Icelandic, sadly. And it's completely random things that I'm interested in. And there's nothing, it's so eccentric. I didn't have to consult anyone. I just talk about things that I find interesting, and these are really strange things like conversations and things that other people have not generally been known to be interested in. And it works because, I don't know, people are interested to see somebody who's engaged in what they're doing. And I think possibly there's two people have too limited imagination about what people are actually interested in. And I've noticed on YouTube that a lot of popular videos are just people talking about bizarre things, and it's just not, there's really not action factor in it. It's just that people sometimes manage to be entertaining without action.
If I could add one more thing, or do you want to? Oh, sorry.
No, I was just going to say a couple of things again quickly. In terms of the films, naturally on one side, yes, it's entertainment. It does open up that world for people who might not have been interested in it before. So it certainly encourages new people to be looking at the world. Secondly, with making a film like this, they're doing experiments. In many cases, when making the film, and making it look believable. So that's also pretty positive in itself. Thirdly, in terms of what you're saying about interest in something like Havamal these days, it's very interesting the degree to which a poem like Völuspá is becoming the center of so many theatre productions at the moment. Both sínum, certainly Norway, Sweden, Iceland, Germany, plays about the Viking world, Ragnarok or whatever, but Völuspá is central. And the same thing, Jethro Tull does an album recently with Völuspá at the center of it. And Selvik, and the work that he's been doing with experimenting with music, again, Völuspá is central to it, which means that underlines the degree to which that poem clearly has a great deal of relevance to the present world that we're living in, and not least in terms of global warming and the sun going out and things of this kind. There's a connection between periods, and of course when people are writing down these poems in the 1300s, clearly these works, however they were, when they were originally created and they could have changed over 300 years or so, nonetheless they were still valid over that period. So I think they keep that validity. The meaning will change, of course. The way of understanding these works is going to change because of the way that we come at them. But clearly they keep relevance over hundreds and hundreds of years, and are clearly still having relevance for a number of people, and especially young people these days. So it's a number of things. Yeah.
Yes, you talk about popular culture, you talk about films, you talk about music. No one has mentioned literature in this discussion. So my way to entertainment and, finding out things about history and everything is reading, for example, historical fiction. And there's a lot of it out there. Some of it is horrible, some of it is really good and well researched, as far as people can actually research these things. So what do you think about historical fiction as a way to spread the word?
Certainly works like Vilborg's novels, for example, involve a great deal of research. And again, suppositions of how this world might have been. This is not just battles, it's a matter of living within that world.
Exactly, about the society, roles of women,
absolutely,
things like that.
And clearly the novels, to get readership, they must have meaning to people in our own present time. So yeah.
And then you also have video games, where there's both violence and farming sims, which are both about the Viking Age. And I think it's true, give people too little credit. I think often we're just seeking connections, and you can get that in various ways with these stories. And fiction is a perfect example of that.
Question at the back?
Okay.
There's a question right at the back.
Okay, before we continue, maybe William wants to comment on the violence part.
Actually, a couple of things, if I may. So Gudrun said that Icelanders were not Viking, is that correct?
I said that we didn't perceive ourselves as being Vikings. We perceived ourselves as being related to saga heroes.
Yeah, okay. It just does seem like, based on our research at least, that there's plenty of evidence suggesting that early settlement age Icelanders were indeed participating in these kinds of Viking activities. So, literary sources, law codes, and so on. So I would say there is some evidence of Viking activities among early Icelanders. The other comment I wanted to make concerning the historical fiction, if I may, I would like to hear from the panelists their recommendations, because all of the historical fiction set in the Viking Age that I've read, I read the story and I say, well, that's not the Viking society that I'm familiar with. I see aspects of it, but these people are doing things. These people are motivated by factors that I don't see evidence for in other sources. So I'd like to hear what author I should be reading, because I'd love to read historical fiction set in the Viking Age. I'd be really in that. Something else that I missed?
No.
Okay.
Any other? No, okay.
Yeah. I would like to add a different perspective to this notion that preconceived idea and ideas in the population can be exploited as a marketing device to attract people to the discipline, because that's certainly true in a few cases, but, and this is just my anecdotal experience, I have seen probably more cases in which when people found out, let's call it the truth, they were disenchanted with the subject, they were disappointed, and they went as far as denying the opinion of experts. I mean, I have seen plenty of these examples in the comment sections on YouTube, in the channel of Dr. Jason Crawford. I wonder how beneficial this attitude can be. I've seen people coming to the National Museum of Iceland and commenting that they were disappointed that there was too much Christian stuff. People starting with Viking and medieval Norse studies and finding out that there's too many monasteries and monks and priests, and they came for something else, and then they just gave up, they dropped out. So I mean, it's probably a double-edged sword, and I wonder how ethical it can be to just to kind of make this false advertisements exploiting what the expectations of people are, and then showing them, oh sorry, it's all priests and church writing and so on.
And there needs to be a connection, right? So if you have, for example, a museum, which is, I keep talking about that because I'm a museologist. So yeah. But one of the things that you need to do is the marketing always needs to reflect the exhibition, because if you don't, people come in and they're disappointed and they say, you're just not talking about the real things. So you need to consider what you have in the exhibition and how you're presenting it, and then make the marketing fit that. Otherwise, disconnect is going to be, well, either I'm not understanding it properly or the museum is failing me, and neither situation is going to be good. So you need to create expectations that fit.
I think it's inevitable that all our learning about the past is erroneous at first. Like, we all learn about the past from a source that's not accurate. Like, I heard about King Arthur from Prince Valiant, and to me, all other narratives about King Arthur seem slightly false after that, because the first one is the right one. And this is just like, this is a beginning. It cannot be otherwise. You never start with actual deep learning. You must go to some adaptation that is modern, and it's very skewed in some way, and it reflects what the modern author wants to say, rather than what actually happened. This is just like how things go. This is the reality we live in. So, and then we can try to work with that, like in any way we can.
But I understand, I think, a central question that you're posing for someone in a position like ours, which is, are you playing a bait and switch? Are you saying, you know, here's a Viking sword and Viking helmet and, you know, Odin and Thor, and then, you know, switching that out for here's some tapestries and some homilies, which is not what the people who are attracted to the swords and the Viking helmets want to see. I understand what you're saying. I think personally, one of the ways that I try to deal with that is by not advertising that way. I use the word Viking extremely sparingly, for example, in titles of videos and descriptions. And my videos don't use a lot of flashy graphics when I'm trying to reach the public, even though I know that it's probably slightly important for people. I try to give them something to look at, you know, nice mountain background.
I really admire you for that.
Thanks. Well, and part of what I also try to do is not sell myself as a Viking. I think that one of the traps you can fall into is trying to be the Viking influencer guy. It's like, this is what Thor and Odin wants you to do. Instead, most of my videos are talking about things like language, right? And it's surprising how many people are interested in that. In fact, this kind of comes back to what we were talking about earlier, violence versus other aspects of the culture. For all of the talk about fights and weapons and armor and such in the sagas and in the myth, one of my biggest videos of 2022 was out on Viking. Yes, you should celebrate this. We sat in the archives of the National Museum, and you said, you know what, I'm kind of tired of pulling out the swords. Let's pull out some artifacts of people's daily life, and my audience really liked that. I don't think that's necessarily what first drew them into this, but I think also that an academic interest is a little bit like a relationship. This is going to be a really sleepless metaphor. We meet someone and fall in love with someone for whatever that first impression is. But if it's a good relationship over time, as you learn more about that person, some things are going to contradict your first impression, but there's still going to be something about that person that keeps you there, or maybe you do leave. But I think that sometimes people's academic interests, or maybe academic interest is a little bit of a grand term to use for something someone reads about in their spare time. But I think that people's interests can survive a change of perspective on that interest.
I'd like to follow up, if I may, on something you said. Jackson just said that he uses the word Viking sparingly. And something that we say all the time in presentations at Herstwick is that we are not Vikings. For instance, I like pizza, and every 6 months I go to a dentist and get my teeth cleaned, and Vikings didn't do either of those things. So for me to call myself a Viking is just out and out a lie. It's just a falsehood. You know, for someone who's doing research in this work to say, I am a Viking, they are not, and it confuses. I think it pollutes the research. It pollutes their state of mind if they have in the back of their mind, I'm a Viking, so I'm going to do the research in this field. So we try very, very carefully to say, we are not Vikings. We are modern people. We like pizza.
If we start to see ourselves as Viking or associate with them in any way, we start to look for them in our research. And then we will find ourselves, or what we want to find in ourselves. And that's why we really make that clear. We are not.
You have to bear in mind that the Vikings, they were not always fighting and killing. They were traitors. Say, the Norwegians in Dublin, they were traitors, slave trade, and other goods. Not fighting all the time.
No.
If I may add, we've been talking a lot about how they were not fighting, how this was a society of something different we need to focus on. We also need to remember that this was a society totally different from ours. This was a violent society. And the fact that we only found X many swords in Iceland is still a lot. It's 11% of the graves we found a sword in. And if we found an assault rifle in 11% of the graves of any society, we would not say, let's focus on something different, let's push it away. This is part of the zeitgeist. It was a violent world, not that they were violent every day, and not that they didn't have many other aspects, but we can't shun away the violence.
I think also one of the problems is that we have taken away the dimensions of the past, like humor, irony, and everything. Everything is deadly serious. People talk about these things as they were always focused on these certain things. And this idea about a warrior culture and glorification of battle, I never think it was that way. And I actually was very much influenced by reading Halldór Laxness talking about literature when he wrote Gerpla, where he makes fun of the endless fun. And of course, Forsprenarsaga is very ironic. And I went into looking at these things similarly, in a similar way that Terry Jones did when he took Chaucer's Knight and looked at him. Because people have been reading Chaucer very literally, taking out the humor and the irony. But Chaucer's Knight is not a hero, he's not a glorified person. He is an asshole, he is basically a mercenary, he is present at all the atrocities of that time. He is killing children and women, and so this is not a glorification. And Chaucer knew his audience, he knew they would get the irony. But we are pretty sure that that what we are reading is very serious. When you have Grettir come from Norway, and he stands there in full battle gear and is waving his sword, sort of all dressed up and nowhere to go, and he sees a simple farmer standing there raking hay, and the farmer looks at this idiot and thinks, who is this? And this is so obvious when you read the saga. And the same thing, I mean, there's no glorification of our ancestor Egill Hjaltason. We know that he was a baddie, and he lived a terrible life, and were it not for his daughter, I mean, he is someone only a mother and a daughter could love, basically.
I'd like to add a little bit to what Jackson was saying, that when we met at the museum, and when I was getting a little bit fed up with pulling out the same sword, every single day, and then especially when I get the kind of question, okay, I want to know the people in those days. You bring out the ordinary stuff, you bring out the common material culture, and which is fascinating, and only we only do have around 20. We have 24 physical Viking swords. There's sources around 2 or 3 or something like that. But we have hundreds of thousands of fragments of other artifacts that tells a fascinating story as well. So, for example, that's one of my favorite spindle whorl and the loom weights and stuff like that is really interesting. And it to me, it's always kind of strange how we are fixated on weapons. It's all right, we should not downplay their importance, but there's a lot of other stuff that we haven't looked at.
I feel I'm blessed by being that Icelander who looks least like a Viking people, or how people imagine a Viking should look. But of course, you cannot escape the fact that 13th century, 14th century, 15th century Icelanders are obsessed with violence. That's what they write about. Like, people now want to know what they said about the Northern Lights, and the answer is nothing. And they had nothing to say about such things. They were not interested in things that interest us now, but they were really interested in the violent aspects of their ancestors. But of course it's used also as a prism for a lot of things, like humor, social situations, explorations of valor, and just how people react. And we have endless reactions to violence that are interesting in sagas such as Njál's saga. And let's not forget all the shepherds and the servant ladies who are there participating in these violent acts, but not fighting. They have different roles. So the narrative obsession with violence is a way to explore the society of the past through exciting things like battle.
It certainly applies to our own culture today. If anybody was to look at the image of the world that's presented through television, how many murders and how many wars take place, and simply it's not. Well, it might be interesting. Golf, I think, is pretty boring. But to actually sit and watch somebody farming for about 3 hours through Norwegian slow television. so we have to bear that in mind. The image that's presented. But I think, as the others were saying, I don't think I use the word Viking very often in anything that I'm teaching. I tend to talk about the Nordic peoples. And underlining, and I like, and we all enjoy breaking down perceptions that people come with. I like that we like the discussion that goes on. One of the best comments I've ever had from a student was bullshit. It was great. It was about 1984 at the time. This is a novel that's bullshit. Okay, great, let's discuss that. But just and in the same way, another motto of mine is never trust an academic and certainly never trust me. But take a look and see what I'm presenting and then we can discuss it. But what I'd like to present certainly is that to get away from Icelanders, Norwegians, Vikings and whatever else, this was a very diverse culture, where ways of living, ways of religion varied by fjord when it comes down to it, depending on how people were living. Sweden, a huge multivariate population. So that this is the exciting side of it, is to take a look at this variety that existed at the time. Yes, they were connected by language in certain ways, certain concepts, but there were a whole pile of dialects out there. So when all the Icelanders came here, they didn't all come here and spoke Icelandic, they came here with a whole pile of dialects, and half the time they didn't understand each other, which is why they killed each other and misunderstanding. It's a variety of places, and that's the exciting side of it. And yeah, they did farming. What's wrong with that? That was sort of interesting to it, kept them alive.
It's also, we have also have to remember that the Viking word is very anthrocentric. Like the Viking Age is defined, it's a period of English history originally, and then we sort of propel that into everything else. But this is how Nordic people appeared to English people in the 8th, 9th century. That's what they do. They come and attack and kill people, and that's their entire image. And when we swallow that image, we are looking through, the world very like in an English way, which is normal if you're English, but not necessarily if you're not. So keep that in mind, that we don't have to take this Anglo-centric image of Scandinavia and just adapt it as our entire belief system.
I don't think removing that word Viking from our vocabulary takes away from its power.
No.
I think that museums use it quite deliberately to say, we understand that this is symbolism that people recognize, now let's do something more with it. So I think removing it from our vocabulary doesn't take away from it. It doesn't remove its power, it doesn't lessen the impact of it. I think what it does, it creates a divide between what the public thinks and what the academics think. And we should rather be talking the same language and spreading it and changing it and making it mean more than just more.
It's a doorway, and of course Viking is connected to exploration and trade, as we've had everything else that is involved with travel.
It's also connected to all kinds of interesting things like like slavery and women's rights and all these different things. And we should be using that vocabulary that people understand and have a discussion together about the truth and falsehood.
And it's also not used exclusively about Nordic people.
No.
In the medieval sources, it's also used about Saracens and people from different countries. Like Viking is a profession, not a race. And this is a misunderstanding that you sometimes see nowadays, that Viking is like Norse. It's the same thing, it's Nordic. This is like not the case in medieval sources.
If I may, I'd like to add one thing about banning the use of Viking. The first book that I wrote, the publisher said, you have to have the word Viking in the title or you won't sell anything.
We use, our method of using it is use Viking, but when we're talking about Viking, we use Víkingur. So, that was all I had to say.
I think there are questions in the audience that we have.
I was to change the subject towards the experiment. Because I think I should make two places where I was wondering if you go through the process and what kind of information, what kind of data you're hoping to get.
I will try, or at least I'll start, and I'm sure Lorena will throw in some more. One of the battle tactics used in the Viking Age, based on a variety of sources, mostly written sources, is attacking a man in his house by setting fire to the house. And the houses, the reason for that is the houses were highly defensible. The way they were constructed, that one or two men standing in the doorway could resist a huge onslaught of people on the outside. There are multiple reasons too. I'm greatly oversimplifying this, but the houses were defensive. So if you wanted to attack someone in their house, rather than exposing your whole team to slaughter, you'd simply set fire to the house and kill them that way. And so we're interested in that battle tactic. How does that actually work? And we have the descriptions in the literary sources. We'd like to use experimental archaeology to figure out, is it anything like what the sources say, and what is it really like? Does the technique even work? Is it plausible? And so we are doing a series of experiments. We've already started a number of them in America, but we'll do the rest of them this weekend at Eiríksstöðum. And the idea is to build houses or house structures. We're actually building portions of houses, instrument them with scientific apparatus, and set it on fire. And so we are going to be exploring this. And I think I see part of the team who is helping us from WPI. WPI is a university in America in Worcester Polytechnic Institute. They have a unique fire protection engineering department that has a fabulous laboratory facility, and they have very kind in giving us access to their laboratory, their expertise, and their equipment. And a team from that laboratory is sitting in the back, and they will be helping us this weekend gather some very deep and very interesting scientific data. The kinds of questions we're interested in answering is, first, in most Viking lands, it's pretty easy to set fire to the house because houses were made of wood, so you just bring fire up to the wood. But here in Iceland and a few other places, houses were primarily made of turf over an internal wood frame. So virtually the entire exterior of the house is turf, and turf is extremely hard to ignite. Once you ignite it, it's very hard to put it out, but it's hard to ignite it. So the fire was actually set at the door, the only exterior use of wood in the house. That wasn't the only way, but that seems to be the primary way based on the literary sources. So you bring fire up to the outside of the door, and what we hypothesized and what our early experiments have shown us is that it's very easy for the door to travel, for the fire to travel through the door into the interior wood framing, along the framing, and then into the interior wood frame of the house. And once that happens, the house is doomed. The wood framing structures are burned away, they lose their strength, and the house collapses. At the same time, the temperatures inside the house become too high for human survival. Plus, there's poisonous gases being generated. You cannot breathe the air that is generated in this. So we'd like to explore all these things. How long does it take for the fire to spread? How long does it take before the house starts to collapse? Can someone behind the door survive there for very long? Again, because the literary sources tell us that there would be people behind the door, for instance, trying to extinguish the fire with misa and goatskin in at least a couple of examples. And why misa? Well, there's a couple of reasons for that, and that's another experiment we're going to do. Is misa particularly effective, more effective than water, for instance? And other experiments is there were negotiations at the doorway, so the people inside the house would be negotiating with the burners to release the non-combatants. How long can they do that? Do they only have a few minutes? Do they have a half hour? Do they have a couple of hours? We're trying to find out. Our preliminary experiments say the negotiations better be pretty darn quick because it's all done, it's all over. There's no chance for survival after a few minutes. So we need to do more of these experiments to find out. I'm probably missing something. What else?
Yeah, I do not know. Well, we'll get some data on if it's possibility of using Jarðhús as well, escape tunnel. I mean, maybe it's too quick for that even. And as Ivar mentioned, it's the probably the first case of fire retardant safety in the Viking Age, an escape tunnel. I think I have nothing else to add. It was complete.
I would like just as a quick one, just to remind everybody here that it's this experiment is really good that it's taking place in Iceland, because it's definitely an excellent place for this kind of experiment because of the preservation of the structures here. It is so well preserved here. We have the structure, we have the wall, foundation and stuff like that, but majority of the structures in Scandinavia, we only have the hose or the post hose. So we have a really unique kind of opportunity here to research this structure. So it's a kind of excellent place to be here.
I'm curious about the Icelandic battle. It's like if you consider the Icelandic weather into the experiment, because I think sometimes Saga mentioned about the weather like very conveniently, but sometimes it doesn't mention at all. Like in Njál Saga when it's burning, I'm curious, it's like if the Icelandic will make the fire go bigger and like more chaotic.
So I don't really have an answer. Obviously, if things are wet, they're going to be harder to burn, but there are materials that one can use to start a fire, and once the fire is started, it'll dry out what's getting burned. So I think it's just going to be slow. Again, based on our preliminary experiments, we did very similar experiments, one where everything was dry and one where it had rained, so things had gotten wet. The one that was wet was slower, but it did not stop the fire at all.
There are countless variables we can add to this. These are sort of the basis we can build on.
And also I'd like to add, this is just the beginning, so we hope that whatever we find, there will be people sufficiently interested to continue building on this, because there's so many more experiments yet to be done. And to my knowledge, nothing like this has been done before. So we hope that it's just the start, the first step of what will be a number of steps, maybe even a long journey, don't know.
I can tell you there will be no rain in Eiríksstöðum this coming weekend.
Okay.
Okay.
Write that down.
No sunshine, but no rain.
Okay.
Gotta be there.
Sadly, it's been raining, so things are wet.
Just to set the panel on fire, can we really take the medieval sources and apply them to the Viking Age? I mean, this is a Christian-based evidence. How they really applied in the heathen Viking Age? Probably the whole panel.
To a degree, they can be used. Of course, we have to keep in mind that several things would have changed a lot, and there would be lack of information about past customs. But like everyday things, like daily life, that would have to be realistic. Like things like how to burn houses. One would imagine that they would think the same applied to the 10th century as the 13th century. So I think but of course this is what we deal with constantly, every day. Like some things in the sagas are obviously anachronistic. Others may not be, and some definitely aren't. So.
Yes, so definitely, as I said before, ships that they're talking about, and that has been investigating this recently. The descriptions of ships, they're ships from the 1300s, they're not Viking age ships. We've got no real knowledge of what a Viking ship would have looked like at that time. Same thing with Old Norse religion. They have an idea that's been passed on. We have to think of an oral culture where things were passed on regularly. There were no books to sort of help you remember. So there's a different sort of oral culture going on at that time. And things would have been passed on. Coward has looked at, for example, in his own thesis, looking at the descriptions. Do they fit? Are they based on reality, or are there something that's been created in the 13th century? So yeah, they'll have an idea of what maybe the Old Norse religion might have been like, but they can, I can't remember which side it is that describes the whole in terms of the church. Is that it? Yes. Yeah. Again, they're describing it in terms of a Christian church, which is what they are aware of, but they had heard that things were different. So of course we have to be wary and always have that in mind. But then we've got archaeology at the same time, which you can use to test whether things make sense or not. But always there has to be a question mark.
I say this as well because there are two schools of thought. And Jón Hnefill Aðalsteinsson, he actually thought there was a lot to be gleaned from the later sources, but he said, of course they were creative. Then you had Rishi Boye who thought everything was crap. There was no real description of these things. And I sailed between, and I think mostly what we can learn from archaeology nowadays. We're not going to find any new manuscripts. There will be no new discoveries in that sense. But I think just use common sense and also what works. And also one thing that struck me was that you need to have a background that comes from a different background to recognize some things. Like Terry comes from a theater background, and he realized that a lot of these things were made to be put on as a show. And we can see that a lot of, say, Greek plays were based on rituals. And Jón Hnefill, who was actually a theologian and was a priest for 3 years, he jumped upon certain passages in the poems that he saw as ritual because he was used to perform a ritual. So it was pretty obvious to him what was a ritual and what was just a nice phrasing. So I think that's a guide. Just use that intuition and also bring in knowledge from other things like theater and performance. And just both imagination and common sense.
Yeah, I think the archaeology could come to the rescue a little bit, but still, archaeological data need to be interpreted, as well. So, but it gives us kind of a unique insight, though. But it's all part of our puzzle, isn't it? So we should try to use the sources, together. But yeah, we'll see how it goes. But at least the archaeology could provide a kind of a different angle to it.
I'd like to follow up, if I may, just to amplify what you said. We think it's really important, at least in our research, not to use single sources. So we use multiple sources. No one source, for instance, literary sources, gives us all the answers. So what we're going to do is use multiple sources and try to layer them up to build a stronger understanding. And just because one source is, how shall I put it, discounted, such as literary sources, because they were written 3 centuries or 4 centuries after the events happened, doesn't mean we have to throw the whole thing out. If that source also agrees with this source, the archaeology, or this source, pictorial sources, or this source, rune stones which are contemporary. So if all this adds up and they all point in the same direction, all these sources point to give us a clear picture, then we'll continue to use that source. But if something is off in some direction, then we really have to stop and think what's going on. Is it an outlier? Is it misinterpreted, like an archaeological artifact that's been misinterpreted, or something else? If something does not match up, we need to step back and understand what it is. But by using these multiple sources and building it up in these layers, it really gives us a strong understanding, and it helps us avoid what I tend to call outliers. It helps us find the common thread that runs throughout so that we can create these holistic images that help us understand this period.
And one subheading to that is that I was thinking about, is I recently wrote an article for you about Haldin, and one thing that's got me thinking about is that the only text that we have is a text written down in 1270, 1280. People want to use it as a source for the society of, say, the 900s, but the text that we have does not date from then, and we have to be realistic about that. And part of what I try to do in teaching reading of Old Norse online is get people to reading manuscripts as soon as they can to see that we really are sometimes a little bit at sea about what the original text here said. It has gone through some oral and written transmission that is confusing, perhaps. But at the end of the day, I think that it's a pretty illegitimate practice to try to archaeodize these texts, as many late 19th century and early 20th century editors did, changing the adder to S and the O and all this stuff. I mean, we have to say, this is the text we have, this is the date, this is a last date that we know it was produced at, and that is the language and the narrative of that date. We can try to roll that back a little bit with the help of archaeological evidence, say, other narrative evidence, but at the end of the day, we just be realistic about the dates of this place. I think we're doing ourselves a favor.
So if I may add a little bit,
can rely on them or not, every single source needs to be interpreted. And one of my claims to fame is that I found an archaeological item dated from the 11th century, and it didn't fit with the sagas. So I had to call the museum and said, "Are you sure?" And they changed the date of the artifact based on sagas. It was much younger.
Something about what we were saying about passing on texts. We know different comparative folklore, comparative religion is looking at other societies as well, and how the oral tradition, for example, works. And we know that a lot of facts can be passed down for a long, long time. Icelanders themselves know, certainly within my wife's family, still telling stories that apply to 1860 and people going to America at that time. So things can be passed on in a solid way for a long time, but you have to be wary about it. You also have to think about whether a Christian could have created this, and is likely to have created this work. For example, certainly a work where God comes to life in front of you, a pagan God, is that something a Christian would have done from far? Do you understand what I mean? Is there anything mentioned in this poem that clearly has come from a Christian background? Or is it possible that it's a text which we know can be done, can be passed on for quite a long time, relatively solid? So these are things to be borne in mind too. But always, as we've all said here, you can't trust it completely.
One thing, and that's where the fun comes in, experimental archaeology. You can just test some of these things out, if they're nonsense or don't work or anything. So, 5 to 7 July, show up.
Can I ask you, are you going to use chickweed?
No, that's a single source.
Yeah.
Oh, good save.
Yeah, I think we have a question too at the back at least.
Yeah, so you will be using fire steels made from Icelandic bog iron.
Yes.
Which is fascinating.
Yes.
So I was wondering, what material will you be using to catch the spark from the fire steel? And will you be using this method for the final burning? And to add to that, in terms of using this method to eliminate the enemy, does it make more sense to bring the fire to the house or start the fire at the door in terms of being a drengur or nýðingur?
I'll try to answer that. So first of all, the fire steel that we intend to use, this is iron that we made at our Iron Festival, also held at Eiríksstöðum about 5 years ago. Yeah, 5 years ago. And so we were doing some experimental archaeology research then to try to understand how it was settlement era Icelanders made iron, because there was much that was unknown and a lot of things that didn't make sense. And I think we were successful. So many people have long believed that the iron made in early Iceland was just very poor quality, crap, as we always call it. And what we showed is that it was possible to make high quality iron with all Icelandic materials and with techniques that would have been known to them from Scandinavia. So good quality iron could have been made here in settlement era Iceland. So we made iron, and one of the things that was made from this iron are the fire steels that we will be using to make the sparks that will start at least one of the fires. Since we are lazy people, we will probably use a pocket lighter for most of the fires, but at least some of them we want to bring in this old history. What will we use to catch the spark? That is a question, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that is not fully understood about what was done in the Viking Age, how these sparks were caught so that they could ignite some tinder, something small to build a bigger fire. And many hypotheses have been put out. Several seem to be well supported by evidence, but I have no idea, and I don't know enough to be able to weigh in on the discussion. So I'm sure we'll be using some modern material. Our expert in starting fires is the blacksmith who made the fire steels, and so I presume we will bring him in to start the fire, and he has brought in his own material for catching the spark. There was another question there, and I think I've forgotten.
So I was wondering, in terms of being a drengur or nýðingur?
Yeah, bringing in the fire. So what makes first of all, the Logandi, graugaus, makes a distinction. So if you start the fire at the house site and burn the house, that has a different penalty than if you bring the fire from outside and set the house fire. So the second one suggests that maybe there's premeditated intent to burn the house, and so the penalty is more severe. So full outlawry versus, what am I thinking? Yeah, thank you. So it certainly makes more sense to strike the spark and start the tinder away from the house than bring that up to the doorway. But if somehow you brought the fire from another site to start the fire, that appears, in the law codes at least, to be frowned upon.
So, yeah, I will add to it just one, sorry. The fire drill is just for show, just to make us look good. It's symbolic. And the immediate versus spreker, in this case, I'm not sure. Setting fire, it seems to have not been the worst of the worst. It didn't like lessen your reputation unless it was in some circle, so I have no idea.
We had another question back there.
Yeah, hello. I'm from Norway. We used, we call it knusk. It's the sock that we are used for catching sparks. And but my thing is that is this a situation of war or a situation where just a person is going after another person? Is this a different, do the society react different to those two, or is both of them equally bad?
I'll try to answer. So many of the burnings that are described in the literary sources seem to be focused attack. This is one person who had a beef with another person, and they wanted to focus that attack on that single person, while trying, at least to some degree, not to injure other people in the household. So to that degree, there was this negotiation once the fire was started to let out the non-combatants, the people who didn't have anything in the fight. In terms of a war situation, I don't think we have any really specific descriptions of what it was done, other than, you know, everything was destroyed with fire. And so we don't know how that worked. So I don't really have an answer to that.
I have a question. If I remember correctly, a couple of years ago they excavated a longhouse in Lancaster, and archaeologists, correct me if I'm wrong, they concluded that this house got burned down. Can archaeological data help us to get any answers how they were burned down, or is there any contribution from archaeology regarding burning houses?
I could take that one. It was 2015, I think. It was excavated, and we should see some evidence of burning turf and something. But it would be really interesting to compare that data to the experiment. For example, see how the turf actually reacts. So, but you do remember this correctly, that it was interpreted that it was burned down. I'm not sure of that. Maybe you have to contact the permanent authorities of it. Of course, a lot more about that excavation. But at least it was burned down. A portion of it at least. Would be really interesting, to compare the data from the experiments.
And so we hope that will be a part of the experiment. Afterwards, someone can really look into it. Someone who knows what they're doing, not us, who can study the archaeology and see what the traces might teach us. It could be applied to other excavations of historical houses.
This is also, like we were talking about the sagas, this is interpretive. Was it an accidental fire? Was it intentional fire? I assume, Ivar, you can help me, that would change a lot of things, if the fire comes from the inside or the outside in and so on and so forth.
Could be, but
certainly I think with the big hall at Gamla Uppsala, there seems to be a difference there, and that the heat inside it was so immense that it was almost clearly set on fire.
yeah.
It had melted everything inside. So there's some sorts of differences I think that archaeologists can.
Yeah, I think you can run this analysis on the organic material left behind and see, okay, what kind of heat they have to endure.
Right.
So perhaps we can.
So Gamla Uppsala was meant to be seen from a long way away. This destruction of the wall.
Okay.
You guys kind of discussed customs a little bit and how you have to interpret them yourselves. Are there any specific customs, kind of similar to how we have like, a wedding, you think of what a wedding is to yourself, or is there anything like specifically we know were customs back then, or is it completely left up to interpretation almost, basically?
There's very little left, and a lot of it is actually some creative things from Norway, actually. The Norwegians came up with the idea that there had been a ritual that was preserved, where a hammer was put into the lap of the bride, and they saw it as an echo of the old poems. Like Trimspear, but I think a lot of it has to do with just being creative. We know that children were baptized, they were vatni. So they used water when they were giving names to children before, so that is something that is usable. And we certainly can surmise that of course we have some coming of age rituals similar to confirmation, and some people speculate that part of Holocaust law is more part of such teachings, but there's no way you can be certain. So again, you have to be creative. And and even with postbrother, everybody thinks they know what that was like, but nobody really knows. And as Colin knows, he's been still looking at that.
Secondly, we have to expect it's going to vary by area. Whatever happens, there's going to be nothing that's the same all the way across Scandinavia. But we have sort of fragments, and again, as I was talking about Calvin's thesis, looking at initiation rituals and things of this kind, and then looking at the fragments. So it's like putting together a puzzle with which you're missing at least 2/3 of the pieces, but you get bits of it, and so there do seem to be. There are various rituals that clearly took place in terms of marriage or the ceremony of a child or things like this. Or certainly looking at the Seder ritual, which is quite a detailed description of that. But again, can we trust it? And again, we have to look at different sources that we have to see if it makes sense. But it's always going to be with a question mark.
Yeah, and also, where do you stop? I mean, Seder is the same word as Sitan in Sanskrit, which is the same word as church in Tibetan, and we know what church rituals are like. I mean, do you go there and try to reverse engineer something from that? I think that's very dangerous, like a lot of people have been doing, because you can read a lot of things into a practice. I mean, we know that Seder was seen as something that could be so obscene that men were so not supposed to, or kallmenn eigi skemmast með að fara. And we know that Freyja teaches Seder to Odin, and Seder fylgdi svo mikið Eiríki, and Eiríki is sometimes seen as homosexuality, and it's very stupid to think that a goddess is teaching a god how to be homosexual. So there must be an extra dimension to that, so you have to really try to figure out what it could be.
Back then is a moving target too, because it's sort of like we're trying to reconstruct the Old West from 1950s movies. Yeah. We can learn a lot about the 1950s from doing that. we can learn something about the Old West from doing that, but we're seeing the Old West through the eyes of people who remember it at best through their grandparents. And I think that something that has infected a lot of modern media presentations is a very generalized otherness that people want to project onto any other culture, right? We want other cultures to be more violent in some ways, more mysterious, more earthbound, things like this. And a lot of these characteristics get attached to cultures no matter what they are, at least in our 2020s filter of them, right? Vikings start looking a lot like outside ideas about American Indians, start looking a lot like outside ideas about Celts, a lot about outside ideas about subcontinental Indians. And I think that's a danger that comes through because we expect there to be more information about that cultural stuff. I remember when I was working on Frozen, it's a good excuse to put my sunglasses back on. When I was working on Disney's Frozen, highest cruise film world, they wanted to know what a Viking wedding was like, and I said, well, I have no idea, actually, right? I mean, people get married all the time in the sagas, but they never describe it. They just say they got married, and they talk about the party, right? I mean, it's the party that seems to be the big social thing. And I told them that, but I thought, you know, like, if I leave it at that, it's just going to become this sort of generalized outsider thing. So it's like, well, let me bring in a detail from something real. And I told them about the Blood Brothers ceremony in pieces like a Swiss arm. And that's why there's the arch in the ceremony that trolls will marry Anna and Kristoff. So it's a little tiny shot of something that's actually something.
I think in general the sagas are a bit like Guðrún Ósvífursdóttir, and she is asked the straightforward questions, and she answers another question. She doesn't answer the question that she is asked, she answers a different question. And that's what the sagas do continually. They are not interested in what you want to answer them, they are telling you something completely different. And that's because they're narratives, they're not manuals. So that's why we have all these gaps, like they leave out all the stuff they didn't expect anyone to film it. So they leave out all the stuff that we need to know.
But sometimes we get little evocative phrases or words. I worked on Gísla saga when that was being filmed, and we struggled with the Pallborðsumræður, and it came out in the end, okay, it looked good, it looked like it could have been like that. And then, of course, we had this matter of hellskól, which Gísli says, you cannot get the hellskól, and so we thought that's a very nice little detail. So he is tying the shoes of the dead man to make sure that he can walk or not walk away from that, as the case may be. So, in a way, sometimes we have little things like that can inspire things that may or may not be. But always a pinch of salt is needed.
The best line in that film is the most unequivocally 20th century line, as he says, "After Sami Grjótkastari." This is such a good interpretation of the saga, but in really, really modern language. But it reaches the core of the sibling relationship.
Absolutely. I think that was Merlin Thomas.
So, just to remind you, you are in front of legends. These guys here, and you will get, you probably will never get as good an answer to your question as now. So if you have it, then please throw it forth. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we talked about preservation, we talked about experimentation, we talked about how we, I don't know, pass these sources on, whether it's podcasts or literature or movies or computer games and things like that. And I think it's a bit of an open question. I'm kind of wondering, from your perspective, what is the objective behind what you do? Where would you like to see it go, if anywhere? And or what is the take-home message for people today? I know this is a bit open and maybe a bit more personal, but
May I ask who this is directed to?
all of you.
Yes,
Perhaps any one of you.
I will answer first then, because I think I have the most simple answer. 14 years ago, the man on my left hand polluted my brain, poisoned me, and pulled me into this really twisted world of Vikings. And I just became fascinated, and it is the discovery, it is wait a minute, do we know that? Let's test it. That's my only passion, and care not much about anything else.
So I'll add, it's the quest for knowledge. I want to learn. Learning is fun. Finding out the answer is fun. Seeking the answer, solving a puzzle is fun. That's the goal.
Well, if we're going down the line,
Yeah.
I guess my purpose is a teacher's purpose. I want to continue to take the questions that people ask about this period and answer them and help them get connected to the people who can answer their questions better than I can. And one thing that I've worked to do, especially in the last couple of years, is to be a conduit from other scholars to the public and give people a platform where they know that they'll be heard respectfully and with great questions, and where people who are interested in their work who would probably never find it otherwise will hear it. That's part of my mission.
I think in my case it's just curiosity, basically. I can be really, annoyingly curious, and especially about human beings and their society, and want to get to know a little bit more about the persons. And I do that through the material culture. That's basically my.
I just think it's about the transmission of ideas, and also how ideas can affect us in different ways than we thought. Someone decided to translate Berlioz into Latin, this poem from Njálssaga, and that poem got into the hands of a Scottish pastor who used it to quote the oceanic cycle, and the oceanic cycle had a lot of influence in Europe. It was a favorite poem of Goethe, and there was a young man in Bessastaðir, Jón Hallgrímsson, who was reading Ocean all summer, and he decided he would try to write a poem in the old similar as Ocean. So he came up with using the old poetic meters for his poetry. So it had basically gone full cycle, given its own tale. So I think this is how ideas are transmitted. And also, what I find fascinating is that Hávamáll is an ethical system that is very similar to Taoism. It's very similar to Confucius or Lao Tzu or Huang Tzu. It's very similar to the analects of Marcus Aurelius and these things. So I think we have always had these ethical precepts in different forms, and I think these precepts are just as valid now as they were 1,500 or 1,000 years ago. I don't think you have to go into reverse engineering and into, like the Germans tried to do, was to see how Hávamáll would have been in the old Althochdeutsch. There's one book called Die Urgestalt der Hávamáll about that. I think we should just take the Hávamáll as they are, and as you were talking about, just let people read them as they stand, not try to make them older than they are, and they will jump at you and they will talk to you. So I think that's a very good way, and that's what keeps me endlessly fascinated, and since I was 10 years old.
In terms of the main take-home thing is, as I said before, never trust an academic blindly any more than you should blindly trust a politician or a bank manager when it comes down to it. Question things. That's what we're all doing here, is not stating, but saying that there are things to question and to discuss. Were the Jötnar giants, for example, I don't think there were. Was Odin the big chief everywhere? I certainly don't think that he was. Was there a pantheon everywhere? I don't think there was. All of these things here, even going down to the Eddic poems, looking at them as something that was read in a book is ridiculous. When we're going back to the Celtic poems, these were things that were listened to, and not just listened to, they were watched and they were experienced. And that's something totally different to reading it quietly in a book. It's a matter of sound. The guys who composed these things, before they got passed on, were passed on in sound, in terms of sound and vision. So these are keep questioning. That's really what's being said here. And also working together, interdisciplinary work, trusting, making use of other people with other skills, putting things together, or working together.
Yeah. No, I've learned so much from you guys that it's unbelievable, and I keep on learning.
Yeah, I guess from my perspective, I think one of the things I would like to say, one of the things I take away is that I would like museums to take more ownership of the fact that they are not neutral spaces. There's no way of displaying history in a neutral way. You're always making choices. You're making choices about what objects you display, what stories and views you're going to take into account and what you're not going to. They're not neutral. There's no way of doing that. Instead, they should take ownership of that fact and have relevant, important discussions with the public about present-day issues. Because the past can teach us so much about things that are important. And I think we should be doing that more actively. I don't understand why we're not. So, really, we should be talking about these things. Vikings are so connected to alt-right, far-right, toxic masculinity, femininity, and all of these wonderful subjects. Why are we not talking about them more? Why don't museums talk about them more? Discussing Vikings and slavery is almost like a taboo. And I don't understand why. So I want us to do more of that. And if I can do some shameless plugging, my book, The Performance of Viking Identity, is coming out in August 9th. And there will be a publication event with Höfuðborgardeild Norrænafélagsins on the 20th of August in Norrænahúsið. So look out for that. There will be music, it'll be fun.
I think Sean Connery, in one of the Indiana Jones films, answered a very similar question with one word: illumination. And I've decided that this answer is so bad that it's actually good.
If there's a final question, then we will probably just finish these formal shenanigans, and we'll stay here for a few moments more for those who are too afraid to ask in front of others. Last question, anybody? Thanks, we should just... Geta?
So the Husky Combat Training Group has done some experiments with a person trying to escape from a door, right? And there are like people surrounding the door, and so what was like the survival rate?
If you like holes in your body and you like to be really aerodynamic, this is the way to go. Just simple as that. And a great question that I could answer. So let's end on that note. Thank you all and all.
I almost came to I was going to start insulting
I don't know, probably not. We would really like to have someone in the house as it's being burned to experience it, photograph it, put instruments on him. We don't know what we're going to be able to do. Save it. Yeah, we don't know.
Það ekki bara gaman. Það er mjög bara svona informal, Já, það er með því að hósta þetta. Ég hef alltaf lítið á þetta með við að taka samtalið með sambóts í Víkingar eða eitthvað hvað skiptir sem við Já. Ég kann ekki.
Grab one.
All right.
Yeah.
I'm here with Hurstwick, but I'm also a student of Jackson Crawford's in his new online courses that he's doing. But I have a question for you, and I'm afraid it's about swords. I'm actually a mathematician, but I'm very interested in the details of the design and the metallurgy that they used during Viking Age, and in the way that the trade routes went and everything. So I was looking at the swords that are on display, and I'm trying to figure out the typology of this sword.
Okay.
So it looks to me or something. Is it? Is it a V? Okay. Maybe that's. So yes, that does look like it might be. Yes. Okay. Because I was thinking, oh, is it a sérfræðingar too? Which look, I always mistake the V's and this. So to be honest, I'm more focused on the swords from the other artifacts as well, from the earlier periods, right? So from like 750 to 950, or even earlier. But so that's why I'm very bad at this. But yes, okay, I think that makes sense.
But is this sword from Hamkestad?
So I wasn't able to. Yes, it's one of the three that's upstairs.
Yeah. But you know, of course, this typology is based on Peterson work in the 1920s.
Yes.
And you should maybe look at
I have. It took me forever to get it. So I'm from America. I ended up having to borrow the copy from the Library of Congress. Because there's maybe 5 copies in all of North America, it turns out. So fortunately I am a professor myself, so I got my institution to get it. But yes, in fact, I needed his book for something else. I was studying the difference between the type H and type I.
I think because Pedersen was only focusing on the hilts or the typological variations.
Yes, and also from Norway. So it's very Norway-centric.
Yeah. But he didn't took into the consideration, the blades and the different typological or the variations in the blade, but of course undertook cost that as well. So as always, the picture is a little bit more complex.
Yes, I was just trying to figure out at what time period we might expect that sword would come into Iceland.
I don't have it in my mind, but I would think I would think mid-10th century, early 10th century, but
okay. Yes. That certainly seems reasonable if it's a type V.
Yeah, but it's one of these kind of steel plates.
Oh, really? Okay, I couldn't see on there that it had the inward.
It's still a little bit sharp.
Oh, really? So Dr. Blake, he is an expert. He is a doctor of math.
Yeah.
He can tell you everything about some analytical things about swords.
Yeah. I'm always looking for more, more to know. But especially with the swords here, even though something has been done and some papers have been written, we need a kind of a detailed catalog. That's something that we need. We need something like Andrew did in Sweden.
You have a job. Because, yes, so he's referring
Find
to
the
fact
money
that
and we get the sort.
the thing that I was doing with Andros's book was actually to look at the type H's and the type I's, those hilts, and look at the blades, and look at the correlations between the dimensions of the hilts and the blades. And what I found was that the ones that are traditionally type I, that are much thinner in the hilt, are, they're not as thick, so the type H is much thicker in the distal direction. They go with the smaller blades. So there is a very good correlation between how much material is in the hilt and how big the blade is. And this is true both when we look at the entire Swedish catalog and when we only focus in on the really well-preserved finds. So it's very difficult to tell sometimes, okay, how much of the blade did we lose? We lose a lot at the edge. But I was able to use the ones that Andrew said, these are the well-preserved finds, and then I also went through and I used his entire catalog, and I found that, yes. So my hypothesis is that it had something to do with the way they wanted the sword to balance. And they want to keep the size because they want the same support on the palm and because they want the same sort of display of the wealthy inlaid hilt, which I think was very important to them because the sword was not just about fighting, it was also about showing your status.
I think even maybe more, at least here in Iceland, showing your status and just showing and have that story to tell that, okay, I own this sword. It's not that I use it. It's similar to my Porsche, come on back home. I won't use it.
That is the comparison
I'll tell you.
It's like, I have a sports car, but you're not a racer.
I think that was even more rather than using it because if you're using it, you're always at the risk of damage it. But of course,
I think they did use them. I don't really buy into the idea that these were ceremonial.
No.
But I think this is why they went from having parallel blades to having plain steel blades with really fancy hilts. Because if I'm out drinking in the meat hall, I'm not going to pull out my blade and freak people out. But, they can look and they can see, oh, he's got the really fancy stuff.
And never underestimate the importance of blade.
Yes. No, this is very true. I mean,
that's just how we are.
Everything that I look at, when I look at the Viking artifacts, it's like, they may have had slightly different standards for what they thought of as showing off, but they all wanted to show off, essentially. And we see this with sagas too,
where it's like, every sort of culture and subculture has their own ideas of the proper line between showing off in a good way and showing off in a bad way. What was there?
Well, if you can back it up. But so thank you. I was really curious about that. And that reminds me of the other question. So the type O that you have up there, it looks almost like the guards and the pummel are cast from bronze or iron. Is it exactly, I couldn't tell. That's what I'm trying to figure out, the construction method there. Because it's so, it's all turned green. So either it's really well preserved because it's, there's nothing of it falling off. That's why I was wondering if it's actually solid bronze.
I would think this has something to do with the preservation, but
okay, no, I mean that sounds reasonable to me. That's what I would expect. But I wasn't sure.
But to be 100% sure, it says many check it or let the grader be
okay. Because there are, for example, like H. There are 2 examples from Norway that are cast bronze. Yeah, it's really weird. I mean, and maybe there were more, and maybe they weren't preserved as much. And I actually wonder if this is part of why the inlay with the fancier patterns was to show that this is not a solid cast. Because you can do, I've had some replicas made for myself, and I had them do cast bronze because it's cheaper than getting somebody to do the inlay, and so they didn't exist with the type H.
Yes.
Are you
going to be there as well?
I was planning to do it, but I have it's hard with the family, summer house. Of course, this business, of course, and I can't skip that. But I was hoping that I would dig it up after some years, you know, because it's really interesting to prepare the data from the result of the fire within the turf, or you know, with the agriculture here.
Yes.
So and then we have
I think we're cleaning it up next step. So we're going to clean it up strategically.
we have something in the ground. The question I was really, I'm really happy that this festival is taking place in Iceland, because we, as I said, independent, we have a really unique kind of opportunity in researching bioethics in Iceland, because when I have my colleagues from Scandinavia, I learned there, and I have them here, I take them on a trip and show them some of the white exposed that we have, and they draw you off. Seeing, for example, there's one around 55 meters long. You can actually see the walls, see the interior, and it's dated from the 10th century. Completely undisturbed. You don't get that kind of preservation in Scandinavia because the house is in Norway. So I'm working in Norway, for example. I found the holes and something like that. It's the whole shit. I'm used to finding the walls and stuff. So I really good
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
For 50 years, just like we do this piece in honor. And so I have another big gallery just so that they can do this presentation. Now his name is on the piece. It's so funny what I'm doing is, I don't know, he's out of uniform right now. I've kept you too long. I know there's
Although I will say that I love more of the can be. It helps get rid of that big switch.
Did you expect to see this exactly in the museum and you just you're just
probably doing most of the time. And then when they went on break,
masculinity. And they took the history of it, this really wide aspect of it. Obviously, and then they ended with a large glass case with only pop culture. There was this t-shirt from Hallmark, the metal band, there was writing shit, there was cartoons, there was even some Nazi propaganda. Just showing you visually, right? Like you see everything it has to offer, and this is the only thing you're interested in, like all like that. Right. That was the most successful.
Specialization is good.
I think we can do both. I think we just need to decide why we're doing it.
Right. Yeah, to your point, what message is the museum trying to convey?
I think one of the things that makes the exhibition here dated is the fact that they don't take their point of view. They just try to be so neutral. They don't say anything. I think there should be more actively.
I try to timeline.
And then there's hardly anything on the second floor or major tournaments. That's my point. And I also love music. I love micro-related music. It's all interpretation. We don't have anything micro-related, so we just decided that the most accurate Viking music is Viking. And I love that. They're like, yes, this is the voice of the Vikings. Just screaming into the microphone. I absolutely love that. It's fascinating. I named my first Viking article after the Led Zeppelin song. Obviously, it's about Iceland Vikings, and they wrote it about Iceland. That was fun.
Thank you.
This is actually almost as well as you are. But being inside of these areas, come from
That being said, I do need my yearbooks